Hi, welcome to our PD session on effective classroom strategies. We'll be looking at a typical second grade classroom in reference to all these strategies we'll be talking about. So the first strategy I'd like to talk about is identifying similarities and differences. And being able to do this in a second grade classroom has been proven to be a success. Some of the main points I found here, teach students how to come up with similarities and differences on their own. So that goes from that gradual release model, from teacher model to shared model to on their own. So it goes teacher, shared, and then to the students, and that's how it would kind of look in a second grade classroom. The number 2 there, identifying similarities and differences also enhances understanding and the use of knowledge, so it's super beneficial for second graders. As I said above, just kind of moving from that teacher directed to student directed will help benefit the students. And then also, super important, especially at the second grade level when doing the whole similarities and differences, to use graphic aids and symbols because those really do at this point in time in development help those second graders understanding of the concept a little bit better. So ways to use that in the classroom, comparing and contrasting, especially in second grade, the use of a Venn diagram, getting them used to that, looking at both similarities and differences among anything, not necessarily just reading, but you could do writing, you can do math, any academic concept, honestly. And then another one, number 2, would be classifying, putting things into sorts, so things that are all alike. A lot of times in class you can do that with phonics, word sorts, or what I like to do it with second graders. And then also using metaphors and analogies, and that one's a little bit trickier at the second grade level, but it does bring out that higher level thinking. And maybe in second grade, those are more teacher-led demonstrations, but using metaphors and analogies to compare things, and then talking about that abstract and literal meaning. So an activity that we could try on our own here. In our benchmark literacy curriculum, we had to read a story called the Ye Shen from our second grade curriculum, and one cool way we use this is comparing Ye Shen to Cinderella because they were both folk tales, and we used a Venn diagram. Students had to go in their stories and underline similarities in Ye Shen and then bracket differences to help out to see those things. And then after they did that, then they transferred that to their Venn diagram graphic organizer. So again, they compared just the stories as a whole of Ye Shen and Cinderella. And then lastly, another transfer model here, creating a hula hoop Venn diagram, so it's a little bit more active, and then students were able to create pictures or scenes that related to each similarity and difference. Strategy number 2 that I talked about was reinforcing effort and providing recognition in the second grade classroom. So that split up into 2 parts, that effort and recognition part. Key points for effort. Students don't always understand the correlation between effort and achievement, so being able to explicitly explain that to children and kind of show them some examples of that will really help. Like I said, explicitly teaching. Helping the process by showing hard work versus, hard work versus effort, and how that pays off. And then also showing that how effort does equal achievement, whether you're using personal examples in the classroom, to really explicitly teach that effort to achievement. And then for recognition, rewards used correctly, appropriately giving students rewards when they deserve it. And that's kind of when students are meeting their standard, not necessarily if they're doing what's expected of them, but they're really meeting that standard and honing in on that, and not necessarily behaviorally either. And then also a symbolic versus a tangible reward, deciding what's appropriate for what standard you are using. Ways to use that in the classroom as far as effort goes, like I said before, explicitly teaching, using personal examples, literature that you're reading, and then using just any teachable moments or personal examples really brings out that explicit teaching. Also, you can have effort rubrics, keeping track of students' effort. In second grade at the beginning of the year, that might be a little bit harder, but you'll move towards it. And then also having students reflect on what is going on in their effort. As far as recognition goes, making it personal to the student, and then also using the pause, prompt, and praise strategy. So giving a student feedback and then praising them for their hard work and kind of what they do to wrap up. And kind of for both, just make sure you're reinforcing to explicitly teach those two behaviors to students. Trying it in the classroom, or an example that I have, students were completing the partial sums algorithm in class. They had to look at 342 plus 748. You add the hundreds and the tens and the ones place, then add the partial sums. During this activity, you'd monitor students. You'd stop in and talk with students and give them some tips. This is a tough one in second grade, so you'd be giving a lot of feedback and then circulating back and praising them for fixing and making those corrections, or even just if they're trying hard and maybe still not getting it. I did this lesson the other day, and students really struggle with this, but it was fun to see the grit that a lot of my students had when doing these problems. Third strategy we're going to look at is cooperative learning. Great ways to promote cooperative learning in class is by ability grouping, using that sparingly. And then also small in size. Groups should not be super big. 4 to 6 kids is usually a good standard group. You should use cooperative learning or group work at least one time per week, if not more. But then also make sure we're not overusing. So you're still able to distinguish if certain students are able to understand the skill or not. Because they need that independent transfer. Ways to use in the classroom, variety of ways to group, not just by ability, thinking of interests, birthdays, numbers, and just honestly randomly. And those are only to name a few. You can honestly group in any way you choose. Just make sure to mix it up. Informal groups versus formal groups and base groups. Informal groups are like your little think, pair, share, just a small amount of time. Formal groups would be if they're working on an academic skill, and maybe you're testing it later, or you're looking at the standard that they're using, but working on an assignment together day to day might be different. And then a base group, and in all your group, that's kind of a checking group, and also I'd like to say an accountability group to make sure students are on task doing what they're doing, and also so they have a familiar face. An example of ways to use this in the classroom, think pairing and sharing on how you got to school in the morning, then getting into groups of 3, people who share the same birth month, so group them that way, and then lastly, in your group when you're there, writing a procedural text on how to get to school in the morning. So that kind of uses a couple different, you get your think, pair, share in with a partner, your informal, and then you get into some formal type groups, and then work on your procedural text together. Again, this might be a skill that you work on together once, but then make sure later on in the unit you are using that gradual release, so you're seeing independently how students are working. Setting your objectives and providing feedback is the fourth strategy we're taking a look at. Goal setting and objectives, make sure you narrow your focus, and when you do that, make sure it's age appropriate second grade terminology, make sure it's not too specific, and make sure you are having second graders personalize the goal to themselves and helping them reach an attainable goal for them. And then number 2, providing feedback, make sure it is corrective, something that students can work on. Also make sure it's timely, specific to the skill that they're working on. Try not to pull a bunch of different skills into one. And then lastly, just that self-analysis and conversational piece, because it's important not only to have teacher and student conversations, but student to student conversations and feedback as well. Ways to use this in the classroom with goal setting and objectives. Make sure they're specific, but be flexible. And also, you can make behavior contracts. So, for example, having students sign a pledge about their behavior for the year. For feedback, make sure it's skill specific. Rubrics. That's a great way to help give feedback. And then lastly, make sure you have some student-led feedback in there, and make sure it's structured in second grade. Make sure they know what they're doing. They have a list of goals, but you can still have that student-led structure going on. Using it in the classroom, just an example, looking at a math example, examine math problem on any given change and how to give change, and then how the student solved it. As you're walking around looking how they solved it, discuss kind of what kind of feedback you would give to this student if you were working with them in class. So in your groups right now that you can look at how the student gave change, and then talk about maybe some things that you would give them to go back to their seats and work on with that. Just some cautionary tales when using these strategies. Number one, these are not the end-all strategies that you should be using. These strategies don't need to and will not be used every day, so don't worry about that portion of it. Not all strategies fit into all classrooms either. It's kind of class dependent. Also, some of these strategies aren't always successful. You might have some failures in your second grade class, and that's okay. This is just a commonality kind of between all of our second grade teachers here, but you also build on your own classroom strategies. Again, referring back to the beginning, it's not an end-all. Okay, great starting point, but make sure you have more to move forward and develop. You don't have to just stick with these strategies. As far as assessments goes, overview of how well they achieved their goal. Look at their strategies to examine how they did and if they met their goal for both the strategy and academic. Obviously, formal and summative evaluations for some of them. Assessment should reflect all the strategies and goals in one. Some strategies that are directly assessed, whereas some show achievement and outcome of testing. All of these strategies are intertwined to lead to high achievement on their assessments. And then just kind of a wrap up, some of the big things that we went over today. All four of these strategies can lead to success in your second grade classroom if implemented. All will look different at times throughout the year. All do not have to be present all the time. Gradually work on these. Give yourself a little bit of grace, but do try to keep them in the back of your mind as far as implementing goes. If they are on your mind, they are easier to implement. And it's not an end-all. It's just a starting point for you to kind of dip your feet in, get them wet a little bit, try to incorporate some of these and see where that takes you. After a little session today, you will get a little handout here. That talks about our effective instructional strategies. So similarities, difference, effort, and recognition, cooperative learning, and then objectives and feedback. So you'll get that handout. Sorry, it was a little cut off there as we get done with our PD session. And here's our references if you need to go back and look. I just want to say thanks for listening. I hope you're able to incorporate some of those strategies we talked about today.